Week 10 of the NFL season is officially in the books, and after yet another crazy sequence of events this week, let us cover the biggest winners and losers of Week 10. And we will start this video off talking about the Broncos and Bills game, the most recent game of the week. Coming into this game, of course, everybody thought the Buffalo Bills would be able to handle their business against a pretty poor Denver Broncos team. Yet, despite the expectations, the Broncos won with a score of 24-22, and are, in my opinion, one of the biggest winners of Week 10. On the day, Russell Wilson was 24 for 29 for 193 yards and 2 touchdowns. And per usual, this Denver Broncos team puts a ton of emphasis on running the football, as Javonte Williams, Jaleel McLaughlin, and Samaje Perine all had a bunch of carries this week. And while the run game was not super effective, they were able to do just enough to get the run game going, which was able to keep this offense fairly balanced. Now, I'll be 100% transparent here. I did not really love the play calling for the Denver Broncos this week. I thought at times they really should have let Russell Wilson cook a little bit more, because there was times they were running the ball on first, second, and third downs, and I thought that was kind of crazy. But I can definitely understand why they would want to go down that route. At the end of the day, last year, this team was one of the most abysmal passing offenses in the entire NFL. But with the Broncos getting healthy in the running back room, I definitely do enjoy seeing Javonte Williams and Jaleel McLaughlin kind of run the ball a lot more. Even if it's not the most effective thing, it definitely does help this offense a ton. And you also have to give a ton of credit to Denver Broncos defense. This is a defense that had their season kind of ruined with that 70-point bomb they got dropped on by the Miami Dolphins. And ever since that game, this has been one of the better units in the entire NFL. Just a complete turnaround from where they were going earlier in the year. This team is now currently sitting at 4-5. And right now, their future kind of rests in their own hands. Now, on the flip side of things, the Buffalo Bills now sit at 5-5, and this was just a horrible, horrible loss. This was a game that the Buffalo Bills basically had to win if they wanted to continue to compete for that AFC East title. But at this point in their season, barring a miracle, I don't see this team winning the AFC East, and I honestly don't think this team is going to make the playoffs. Before the season, I predicted the Buffalo Bills to miss the playoffs, but even then, I had my doubts. I thought with the talents of Stephon Diggs, James Cook, and Josh Allen, this offense would be totally fine. But it has been one of the weirdest offenses in the entire NFL. Just look up any video watching film breakdown on this Buffalo Bills team. They kind of tell the whole story. They can't run the ball, and Josh Allen is just throwing some crazy passes. And I really do feel bad for Stephon Diggs, because when he gets the ball in his hand, it's a much better thing for the offense. But teams are really zeroing in on stopping Stephon Diggs, and it ultimately hurts the offense a ton. And defensively for the Bills, they have been able to hold up, but ultimately because of the injuries, it's still just not much of a talented unit. And Sean McDermott's job as a defensive coordinator and the head coach is definitely now potentially up for grabs. And as of when I'm recording this video, they just fired their offensive coordinator, so I definitely do think that is potentially a nice step in the right direction. But I don't know. I don't see how it gets much better for this Buffalo Bills team, especially for this year. Alright, let's go ahead and move on to our next game, which is going to be the Giants versus the Cowboys. I don't want to spend too much time on this because there's not a whole lot to really unpack here. For Dallas, Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb are playing some of the best players in the entire NFL currently. Ever since the 49ers game, Dak Prescott has been playing like an MVP, and CeeDee Lamb is playing like a top 3 receiver in the entire NFL. Now, let's not overreact to all this that's been happening with Dallas. They beat a New York Giants team that is arguably the worst team in the entire NFL. Of course, Dallas was able to dominate from start to finish, both offensively and defensively, but that was the complete expectations, and you can't be mad at Dallas for meeting those expectations, but you also don't want to overreact and call them Super Bowl contenders just because of this win. Ultimately, though, Dallas did get a huge win after losing to Philadelphia last week, and they did their job. Offensively, they look much better with the unit of Brandon Cooks and CeeDee Lamb finally getting going. The only big concern about this offense now is just Tony Pollard and what they're going to do with him, but I do like the direction the Dallas Cowboys are going. I still think they are firmly Super Bowl contenders. As for the New York Giants, listen, this season has been absolutely brutal. I don't think Daniel Jones is the guy. I know he wasn't playing this week, but I still don't think that's the case. You're going to end up with a top 5 pick, and I definitely do think that you can pick a Drake May or potentially a Caleb Williams if he somehow is able to fall. Will they go down that route? I doubt it. I think ultimately this team will end up taking either an offensive tackle or a receiver, which I don't think would be bad for this team either. But at the end of the day, this Giants team has so many problems stemming from the offense and the defense that I think it's going to take multiple years to fix this roster from start to finish. But let's go ahead and move on to our next biggest winner of the week, which is going to be the Houston Texans, and of course the Cincinnati Bengals are going to be one of our biggest losers of the week. Now, I'm not going to talk about the Houston Texans because I literally just made a video on them, so I'm going to pin that up right now if you want to check that video out. I go into a ton of detail regarding this Houston Texans team and where I see their team going in the future. But as it pertains to this year, great victory for the Houston Texans, and for the Cincinnati Bengals, this is just an abysmal loss. Now, coming into this week, this was one of the hottest teams in the entire NFL. They had some huge wins over the Arizona Cardinals, the Seattle Seahawks, the San Francisco 49ers, and the Buffalo Bills. And this was sort of thought to be a competitive game, but ultimately a game that the Bengals will be able to outclass the Houston Texans. But then the Texans won. Now, it was a very entertaining game, and the Bengals had several chances to win the game, but I think that's kind of the scariest part about it. The Bengals probably should have won this game, but they didn't. And they had several opportunities to win this game, and this was a game that they had to win. It wasn't like the Bengals were sitting here 8-2 or whatever going into this game. They came into this week 5-3, and if they win this game, you sit at 6-3 and look really good. And if you lose this game, well, like they did, you go 5-4. And with the way the playoffs are currently shaping out, 5-4 is just not going to be able to cut it. There are several teams in this AFC, some that I don't think are as legit as others, but nonetheless, all have kind of 5-4, 6-3, 4-5 records. And while I still think Cincinnati is probably one of the better teams within the AFC, losing to Houston in kind of the fashion that you did is definitely a scary sight. This is a Bengals team that is kind of all in on this year, because ultimately you're going to have to pay some of these players, like a T. Higgins, for example, next year or in future years, and I just don't see the Cincinnati Bengals team having the cap space to be able to fill out this roster effectively, especially after you just paid Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase a F-ton of money. Now, the good news for this team is that they have a young defense, so they shouldn't have to really worry about paying those guys in the next couple years, but regardless of that, this is your team ultimately for the next 3 years more than likely, plus and minus a couple players here and there. But if you can't beat the Houston Texans in sort of a must-win game, I don't know what to tell you. Are the Bengals still Super Bowl contenders? I think they're in the mix for it. I do think they'll make the playoffs. I don't think this team is bad enough to not make the playoffs. But right now, you have to win this game, especially for this season and how important of a game this actually was. Just a massive letdown from the Cincinnati Bengals this week, as I was hopeful that this team was going to win the Super Bowl. But let's go ahead and move on to our next game. And maybe the biggest surprising game of the week, the Cleveland Browns beating the Baltimore Ravens. And don't look now, but the Cleveland Browns are 6-3, and they look pretty good. I think this is the first time we've seen this Cleveland Browns offense kind of look competent at times. Deshaun Watson is far removed from what he used to be in Houston, but he is playing much better, especially as of late. And going up against a dominant Baltimore Ravens defense, this Cleveland Browns offense just dropped 33 points. Now, they definitely did get a bunch of help from the defense, as I believe the defense actually scored some points themselves, and it wasn't like the Baltimore Ravens defense was just giving up a crap ton of points and yards here and there. But ultimately, Deshaun Watson played a pretty clean game. But I think the best thing that happened for this Cleveland Browns team, Jerome Ford had 17 carries for 107 yards, and Kareem Hunt kind of got things going as well. If this Browns team can get this type of production moving forward from this running attack, they can be a competent offense. And a Browns team that has one of the best defenses in the entire NFL with a competent offense is a scary sight. Sure, the Baltimore Ravens dropped 31 points on the Cleveland Browns, but you got to remember this is a divisional matchup where both teams kind of know each other's tendencies and this and that. But if you take away the first quarter where the Ravens scored 17 points, the rest of the game they only had 2 touchdowns. And this was just a massive victory for the Cleveland Browns as they looked to kind of maintain pace with the rest of the AFC North. For Baltimore, you still stand on top of the AFC North, and you're still one of the top contending teams in the entire NFL. It was a super bizarre game where they actually held the lead for the majority of the game, and then late in the game, the offense was just super stagnant and turnovers were just killing them offensively. Had they not had the turnovers, they probably end up winning this game. So if you are a Ravens fan, I'm not terribly concerned. I know the national media might tell you that this Ravens team is fraudulent and they're not going to end up winning a Super Bowl, but I can tell you guys certainly without a doubt in my mind, they're still contenders. And Lamar Jackson is still one of the front runners to win the MVP in my opinion. And if you look at the rest of the AFC North, I think you see a bunch of teams minus the Bengals that are just kind of overperforming. The Steelers sit at 6-3, but they've only scored 156 points in comparison to the defense has given up 182 points. You do have to give their flowers that they do kind of get that offense going in the fourth quarter, and that defense is super good. But let's not kid ourselves by no means. That Steelers team is not competent enough to win this division. And for anyone saying this Steelers team is actually good, get a life. They actually suck. They might make the playoffs, but they're going to get bounced in the first round, and I'm going to live and die by that. The Browns are looking good, especially defensively. I do still have my concerns with their offense. But again, like I've mentioned, if this offense can really get things going, especially in that run game, they can be kind of scary. And the last team in the division, the Bengals, they look kind of fraudulent if I'm being honest with you. They have the pieces offensively and defensively, but they just have not been able to put it together. And I think currently if the Ravens and the Bengals were to meet up in either Baltimore or Cincinnati, I think the Ravens win. So for Baltimore, I do consider you losers of this week because you really had a good chance to take a stranglehold on this division. But I don't think it's like a big deal in my opinion, unlike the last team I want to talk about. But before we talk about this last matchup, I did want to bring up a couple honorable mentions for both the winners and losers side of things. For the more positive side of things, I think Joshua Dobbs and Kyler Murray had great victories this week. Both players played really good, and I think Joshua Dobbs might have a future with the Minnesota Vikings now. And as long as Kyler Murray continues to play like this, I think he's a long-term quarterback for this team moving forward, whether you agree or disagree. As for a couple of losers, I got Derek Carr, Zach Wilson, Will Levis, Brandon Staley, and Arthur Smith. We'll start off with Derek Carr. He has been horrible this entire season, and I'm not saying you bench him, but I do have Chris Olave on fantasy football, and I like what I saw from Jameis Winston, so please start Jameis Winston. Zach Wilson did not play a horrible game, but that Jets offense is absolutely terrible, and of course it starts at the quarterback position. happen. I'm also not a big fan of Nathaniel Hackett with Zach Wilson, so I don't know, that's that. I do consider Will Levis to be a loser this week because he had such a big hype train going for him, especially after his first week performance. But unfortunately this week he just did not look that great. Now he was going up against a decent Buccaneers defense, but this is the same Buccaneers defense that gave 5 touchdowns up to CJ Stroud, so I would have liked to see Will Levis have a decent game at least. Brandon Staley should be fired, his defense is an absolute joke. And yeah, Arthur Smith, please leave the Atlanta Falcons. I know everyone and their grandma has said it, but you have Kyle Pitts, Drake London, and Bijan Robinson, yet you're still losing games. Enough said. But let's talk about our last matchup, which is going to be the San Francisco 49ers absolutely pouncing the Jaguars. The final score was 34-3, and the 49ers look like the 49ers again. I still think the 49ers are legitimate Super Bowl contenders, and I've been maintaining saying that the entire season. I didn't really care they went on a 3-game losing streak. The way they beat down on Dallas and then proving it again this week, they're contenders. And they're going to have more chances later in the season as they go up against the Philadelphia Eagles later to prove that they are legitimate contenders. But I really wanted to put my focus on the loser side of things, the Jacksonville Jaguars. This has been a very bizarre year for the Jaguars, as this offense at times has looked incredible, but also at times has looked kind of off. And while you sit on top of the AFC South, the seat is kind of getting heated up as the Texans are looking a lot better week by week. And it also doesn't help that you've already lost to that same Houston Texans team. Now, I did not expect this Jaguars team to beat the 49ers, but I was really just hoping the Jaguars would look competitive in this game, because had the final score been something like 34-24 or 34-27, I still would think we'd be talking pretty highly on the Jacksonville Jaguars. It would kind of be resembling what the Dallas Cowboys did against the Philadelphia Eagles, where they lost the game, but they still had kind of a good loss. And while I understand there's no such thing as a good loss, all losses at the end of the day still count the same. More for the morality side of things, if they had a competitive game with the 49ers, I think in a sense it would have kind of validated how they feel about this current roster. But they got destroyed completely. And San Francisco is a damn good team, and they made the Jaguars look like a bottom 5 team in the league. There's a lot of blame to go around, but I'm going to start off with the play calling in this game. And while I understand it is up to the players to ultimately execute the play calling, I thought the play calling was kind of off, and I think I would have liked to have seen them go a little bit more vertical rather than horizontal. I hope that makes sense, because a lot of the stuff they were doing was a lot of quick screens, a lot of handoffs. I would have liked if they just let Trevor Lawrence kind of go back there and cook. I know you really don't want to let Chase Young or Nick Bosa dominate the game, but regardless of that, I think you have to give your offense at least a chance. And if you are going to run the ball, stick to it. Commit to it. You can't be half in and half out with the run game. It's either you're going to be an extremely balanced offense, a run-heavy offense, or a pass-heavy offense. You got to pick one. You can't be a bit of everything, especially if you're not good at everything in this current situation. Now, for the Jaguars, this is kind of a positive thing. This team definitely did need sort of a wake-up call. As it goes for the future of this Jacksonville Jaguars team, I still think they will ultimately win the division. I just don't see Houston being that good enough to get to that point where they can potentially win this division. I do think Jacksonville will be able to secure that spot. But is this team legitimate contenders? I kind of tend to say no. Like, if we saw this Jaguars team go up against Baltimore or Kansas City, do we think they beat them? I kind of think no. Could they beat a team like the Bengals or the Steelers if they somehow get in, or the Browns? Probably. And I'm sure they can make a run for it, kind of like Cincinnati did back in 2021. But again, I don't see this team going out there and beating a top team like the Chiefs or the Ravens, or again, some of these top contending NFC teams. And I'm not overreacting to this week. This was a ugly loss for this team. But yet again, what do I know? We'll have to wait and see. But hopefully you guys did enjoy this video. If you guys did, make sure to hit the like and subscribe button, as well as share this video to all your friends and family. I also make YouTube shorts, so if you do enjoy the shorts content, make sure to check out my description where I have the link to that channel. But I love you guys. Peace.